Hey PC World fans, Adam here with Gordon, and today we're talking about Ryzen 7000 power consumption. There's two reasons why we want to talk about it in a separate video, and we didn't tag it into the other bigger benchmark video, which you should go watch. It's a good video, kind of going over all the numbers and the bigger bar better kind of stuff, but specifically around Ryzen 7000, there's two interesting stories, at least to me. One of them is, how much power does it use compared to 12th gen? We know that a 12th gen can be sometimes a power hog, and we also know that Ryzen 7000 has upped their power consumption, the TDP that they can draw to get better gains, of course. But then also AMD talked about these things, eco modes, like running a chip at a lower wattage, but still getting the same, if not better, performance as opposed to Ryzen 5000. So I want to dig in both those, but first, let's talk about overall power consumption. Gordon, how did you test this?
Yeah, so we're a little different than probably what a lot of the reviews are going to say out there. I basically build two systems that are the same power supply, Corsair HX 1000, 80 plus platinum power supplies. They're both using GeForce RTX 3090 Founders Edition cards.
Okay.
Both of them have 32 gigs of memory set to DDR5 6000. XMP and Expo profiles loaded. Okay. Same SK Hynix 2 terabyte SSDs, same drivers, same cooler. So we basically have two identical systems.
Okay.
And then I capture the actual power consumption while it is running an application using a pair of logging watt meters. Huh. So that is, if you're expecting actually chip package power, I'm not doing that. I'm doing it in a way that I think probably is what matters to most people, because I pay for power by how much power I use to the power company. I can't call up my power company and say only charge me for my more efficient CPU. So again, all things equal except for motherboard, slightly on RAM because they are a little different on the RAM, and the CPUs.
Okay, all right. So, and then what testing did you do to test this power consumption?
Well, I did a few things. First things I want to show off is Cinebench R23. You see this a lot. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of it this morning. And as you're looking at this chart, you can see the Ryzen 9 7950X in red. You can see the Core i9 12900K in blue. You basically see I kick off the tests. We go from idle of maybe, I don't know, 75, 80 watts for Core i9, maybe 90 watts for Ryzen 9, and we spike up to about 350 watts for both CPUs, and then we kind of see the line as it's running the entire test. You will notice on this test these weird drops. Like, what is it doing, Gordon? Why are we seeing these drops? Well, when you're running Cinebench R23, it basically renders a frame. It finishes, it resets, and it starts rendering the exact same frame again. And every time you do that under these high power consumption loads, you can see it drop. So every time you see that drop for the blue or the red, that basically means it's finished rendering a frame. When it comes to 3D rendering, the more frames you render faster, the better. It means you can go do something else. Just to give you an idea of just how damn fast Ryzen 9 7950X is in an all multi-core load, especially something like Cinebench that just scales perfectly with core count. It renders 28 frames, basically in the same time as the Core i9 renders 21 frames. Ooh, right?
Okay.
So you've rendered 7 more frames, and I noticed you're going, hey, the red line actually, it goes on further than the blue line. The Intel system finished first, right? Well, that's because the way Cinebench R23 works is this, it measures for 10 minutes, and if you get to 10 minutes and you're still going, it lets you finish that one up. Okay. So basically, because, yes, Ryzen is going out a little further, but that's because it's doing 28 frames versus 21 frames.
Okay.
And, right. You know, overall, look at the power consumption is pretty, I mean, it is lower, right? You're looking at 350, 360 watts for Core i9 versus, I don't know, 325 mostly for Ryzen 9. So
okay, yeah, I mean there's definitely less power used on the Ryzen 9. It's more than the 50X,
50X,
yeah,
considerably
sure.
more actually. For example, the 5950X versus a 12900K probably used about a third the power of the original 12900K.
Okay.
So
Right.
this behavior out of the 7000 is actually a lot closer in power consumption to the original Alder Lake chip.
Huh. But at the end of the day, yes, it's using more power than Ryzen 5000, but it is using a little less power than 12th gen, but it's also significantly faster than 12th gen.
Yeah, so again, you sort of saw that in the number of frames rendered. This next one is the thing that probably is the thing that makes you realize, wow, this thing is fast.
Okay.
This is basically the same deal, except now I'm running Blender 3.3 using the Barbershop CPU render.
Okay.
It's a render that actually takes quite a few minutes to finish. Again, we're seeing, total power consumption between Alder Lake and Ryzen 7000. Very similar, although, it is still a little better for Ryzen 7000. But as you can see, as we spike up to just under 350 watts, the red line keeps going, it's done, it quits, but Alder Lake continues to go on. So basically that line running on and on and on and on for 12th gen means that's just how much longer it takes to do the same amount of work than the Ryzen 7000.
Interesting. Okay, all right. So I guess not too bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad if you, yes, I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, 170 watts, but you also have to remember you're getting significantly better multi-core performance out of this than you are from.
And also at the time though, you were also, against the narrative that 12th gen was just no matter what a power hog.
Yep.
Because at least it was, yes, it was using more power than the 5950X, but it was finishing very much sooner than the 5950X.
And yeah, so I think
so now the tables have been kind of flipped a little bit.
Definitely on the high end, right? So Intel probably has a decent advantage down low, but up high, I would definitely give the advantage to Ryzen 9. But look, actually kind of get into that. Sort of like, it's cool to look at like running every single core in a CPU as hard as you can for a few minutes to watch the watt meter spike up. Realistically, though, a lot of what everybody does, gaming, browsing, Photoshop, is not using all those cores. So let's take a look at the same thing again. Cinebench R23, but using a single thread or a single core for a lot of people. That's how they think of it. Again, you see we spike up in the beginning to maybe 165 watts, 155 for the Alder Lake part. And then we basically burn the boost clock off, and then we drop back down, probably is what's going on. And you can see, again, Ryzen 9 uses definitely a little more power than 12th gen. We're looking at about 100, maybe 135, 138 watts versus maybe 115. Not a huge amount, but definitely I would say that blue line using less power.
Huh. It's almost kind of flipped itself where the 12900K on a single thread is using less power than the 7950X.
Yep. Again, that's actually kind of what I've seen.
Huh.
Under lighter loads, Intel generally does a little bit better. Not huge, but a definitely clear power savings on Intel under lighter loads than on Ryzen.
Okay.
I know AMD actually said they thought idle would be far better in this generation than the previous one. Maybe that's at stock speed, but running the Expo profiles and letting it go flat out, I definitely saw idle power for Ryzen exceed what I was getting out of the Intel part.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. Well, what else did you test here?
Well, so the one thing again, not every application you run, not every game you run is going to sit there and hit all 16 cores all the time. So I also record how much power the entire system is using, running Premiere Pro using Puget Bench, Puget Systems Puget Bench. Again, it's a great benchmark. It basically fires up Adobe Premiere Pro and runs it through a script that lasts maybe 15-20 minutes. And then it spits out a score. We're not looking at the score here. If you want to see that, go to the benchmark section. We're looking at the power consumption while it's running Premiere Pro. Because again, one of the things I have a problem with, a lot of people will say a certain thing uses more power based on peak power. When you're using these modern CPUs, power goes up, power goes down, power goes to the middle, power goes everywhere. So you're seeing that here. Same deal though, red, AMD, blue is Intel.
Well, it's interesting because early on there's more red than there is blue, but then it kind of switches at some point. There's kind of interesting and they both finished around the same time. So we almost can kind of see it line up 1-to-1, where sometimes it's the exact same time. Sometimes red uses more power. I'd say more often red has a bigger spike than the blue.
Yeah.
But there are times where the blue spikes up depending on the workload. That's kind of interesting.
I mean, I think that's the thing is like, that's why you can't really say one is necessarily always better than the other, because even during this Premier benchmark, one sometimes is better than the other. The other one is worse than the other. So why certain parts are spiking up would take a lot more investigation, but you also have to realize Premiere Pro uses the GPU more, because previously on an all-core load we were seeing 350 watts maybe.
Yeah, compared to Cinebench, yeah.
And look where we're at now. So I'm going to guess the left side of what is happening in Premiere, mostly CPU stuff, maybe a little bit of GPU, but definitely on the right side as we are kicking it up past 500 watts of power. That is definitely that GeForce RTX 3090 playing a factor here. So, but again, it is all mixed up in your system. It's really hard just to isolate, what is going to be better. But if it were me, yeah, Intel has definitely a little better idle. We're seeing that again, we're the low, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what about Lightroom? It's not as heavy as Premiere, so.
Yeah, not as heavy. So again, this is Puget Systems Puget Bench running Adobe Lightroom Classic. Same deal. Red is AMD, blue is Intel, and the benchmark basically starts off pushing Lightroom Classic the way a photographer would, doing edits, doing changes, a lot of mousing. So you want that immediate response. And you're going to see sometimes it boosts up on occasion. As you can see, because we know that these CPUs can use a lot of power, 350 watts in general, that is fairly light. It's a fairly light load in Premiere, right? You're not seeing every single core just kick it up. And we're also not seeing the GPU do much. In general, though, you'll see the blue is a little bit lower. Substantial, I don't know, 20 watts. Again, I'm not going to lose sleep over, but clearly better idle, a little lower power consumption by the Intel part on those light threads. And then, so you see we sort of move into a section where it's just simply spiking up and down. It must be doing things like maybe rotating the photo on each of them, right? So you basically crank the clock up to high clocks and you crank it back down. We get to the right side of the chart though, and that's when the script from Puget Bench tells Lightroom Classic, okay, take all the photos I just edited, export them. So generally that's where more cores count. And by the way, when more cores count, that means you use more power. And we see that here where actually, interestingly, look, Alder Lake 12th Gen is actually using a little more power at times than the Ryzen part.
And I also would like to point out, especially towards the end, the Ryzen system is actually finishing some of these tasks quicker than the Alder Lake system, even though the Alder Lake system is using a little bit more power on the right side. So it's kind of a weird kind of like flip-flop, right? At the beginning, Ryzen was using more. Towards the end, Alder Lake was using more. Yeah. But still Ryzen finished quicker. Man.
I kind of saw that with Alt 12th Gen versus Ryzen 5000, where you got to the right side and Intel was just consuming a lot more power. It just might be the actions that are being run in Lightroom Classic by Puget Bench. Also, you are not going to get up to 450 watts just on the CPU, so there's definitely a little bit of GPU there, and that's generally. But you can also see we're not really seeing the GPU play a huge part of this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is under really heavy load. I mean, it's not Cinebench load, but this is still going up to 600 watts at times with the GPU enabled. So what about lighter stuff like browsing and things like that?
Yeah, we do that. We take a look at that in the next test, which is taking Chrome 105. ... whatever version there is, and I use Principal Technologies Web Expert 4. It's a free browser benchmark. You can go look it up right now and run it on your own system. I basically run just that benchmark on both systems, again recording the power consumption.
Okay.
It's a very light load, and I would say it's probably pretty representative of what you might get browsing these days, because oftentimes you go to even websites that aren't doing the advanced things that Web Expert's doing. They serve you a lot of ads and there's a lot of scripts, and sometimes browsing actually can be kind of amazingly hard on a CPU. But look, again, the CPUs aren't doing much. You're looking at power consumption down at 100, 125 watts most of the time. But again, blue is better. Blue lower than red, so
Yeah.
overall power consumption for Alder Lake 12th gen on very light loads is slightly better, 20-ish watts. Again, not enough to lose sleep over, but it does use less power generally in very light boosty loads. But of course, the reality is you need to look at how often you're browsing versus how often you're doing a 3D render using all 16 cores and 32 threads of a CPU.
Yeah, you got to look at it all, right? Well, what about gaming? Because gaming definitely is going to hit the GPU harder. So, are we seeing a difference when it comes to gaming, just CPU wise?
Yeah.
CPU wise, yeah.
Not much. And honestly, this looks very much like when I ran this on Ryzen 5000 versus 12th gen.
Okay.
With basically the same GeForce RTX 3090 Founders Editions. Same thing, running Metro Exodus. It does 3 game benchmark runs. They're scripted, so it's the exact same every time. And you can see we spike up to above 500 watts. 550 watts, in fact, for the Ryzen 9 7950X. A little bit lower, again, that 25 watts for the Core i9 12th gen. But, when you're looking at 525 watts well gaming versus 550 watts, I don't think that is much to beef over. So,
And once again, the AMD part finishes just a little sooner. So.
yes, it's actually very interesting because that sort of is telling it's just simply finishing that script a little bit faster, interestingly.
Yeah,
even though the overall frame rates may not be a big deal.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder if something else is going on. We know the frame rates, the engines, they generate a score based on an internal counter. They're probably not looking at overall time. So it makes you wonder if something is possibly, we're missing some of these scripted benchmark runs.
All right, well, did you do another game?
I did one more, but again, I know everybody thinks you need 8 cores and 12 cores and 16 and 24 cores for gaming. Anybody telling you that is trying to sell, it probably works for AMD or Intel, frankly. That's my belief, because I honestly think you don't need a huge core count for gaming. I've said that for a long time. I think most people would agree you don't need that. It's all about the GPU, but we'll run one more. This is Horizon Zero Dawn, again on the GeForce RTX 3090, 1080p, ultra settings. You can see the performance scores in the benchmark section, but the actual wattage is who cares? I don't care. In fact, as a reviewer, I have to run this test because I have to know, but every time I know, I get to the end, I've wasted my time because it's told me exactly what I knew. Gaming is mostly GPU, and the GPU is eating most of that power.
Yeah.
As we see here, but again, yes, Intel saves a little bit more power, maybe 15 watts. Again, do I care? No. But because you have made me do this, I have done it.
All right, well, either way you slice it, the Ryzen is using more power.
But faster. Much faster.
Yeah. So it is using more power. I think one of the other concerns is if it's using more power, it's going to cause more heat. Once again, it depends on your workload. It depends on what you're doing. But AMD has come out and said, well, hey, if you want to use less power and generate less heat, we have these things called eco modes. Depending on what chip it is, you can run it at a lower TDP. And still have good performance. So you did test a little bit in eco mode. It just feels weird to buy a very expensive 16-core CPU and say, you know what, I'm intentionally going to run it at a lower TDP and not get all that performance. But you know what, guess what? Sometimes you might want to.
Small form factor.
Maybe, we'll see. But is there an actual benefit to running in eco mode then?
Well, first let's look at the actual power consumption.
Okay.
So again, remember we saw that Cinebench R23, 10 minutes or so, rendering the same frame, blah, 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 blah. So now I take the exact same AMD setup, but I turn on 2 eco modes, Eco 65 and Eco 105. I do want to tell you, it is a work in progress. Right now it's kind of buried somewhere in a BIOS. AMD says later on we're going to have it surface somewhere else, and also it's not currently supported in Ryzen Master as you watch this today. But eventually you will be able to go into Ryzen Master and say, I want 65 watts because my small form factor is overheating, right? So now we see the power consumption here. We see Ryzen again, slightly better than Core i9, but And an all-core load, we're looking at what, 330. Of course, Core i9 up there, 360. So Alder Lake 12th Gen is using more power. The next line down, though, we see the a Ryzen 7950X running in 105 watt eco mode. So we are now down to maybe 240 watts of power consumption. We get a couple spikes. Interestingly, there's one huge spike at the end. I'm not sure what is up with that. Whether the GPU kicked up, I don't know, but it's a little weird.
And also, like you said, it's early days. This is, pre-release. Sometimes there's little bugs like that, so I wouldn't take it too seriously. But maybe when the final release is out and you're seeing something like that, maybe something to dig into. But
still, we're looking 240 watts, and also we sort of see the similar. Every time it renders that frame, it drops. Some of those aren't quite apparent on that 105 watt thing, but overall you can see it. And of course, on Eco Mode 65, we're looking at about 180 watts for the 65 watts. Remember, that's total system power with the GeForce RTX 3090 Founders Edition, 32 gigs of RAM, 2 terabyte Gen 4 drive, an H150 360 millimeter rad. So there's a lot of hardware here. You're going, oh, how come I'm not getting 65 watts? There's other hardware that runs when you're running, including the motherboard, all the stuff. Total overhead, but by the way, that's what you pay your power company for. So yeah, you're actually getting a considerable, power savings on 105 and really for 65. Yes, this is power consumption. I know people are like, well, how does that translate into heat? Well, you're probably putting out less heat too. If you're not using 350 watts of power to render this out, you're only using 180, using half that power, I would guess you're probably going to be outputting considerably less heat.
I do want to test later. We will get around to that testing. Obviously, before the review, there's only so much we can do. So, but it is something I do want to get around to. Okay, so we can see that they are indeed using less performance.
Less power.
Less power. But how is that going to impact performance?
Okay, so to actually answer that, we're going to look at Cinebench R23, which you just saw the chart for how much power they are consuming. First up, single-threaded.
Okay.
Single-threaded performance, because I was actually kind of interested when I ran this last night at 11:30 at night. I didn't want to do it, but you know what, got to do it. And the result was basically what I knew would happen. It doesn't matter because, if you have a CPU, you're only using a single core. It doesn't matter. Because you're not going to consume more than the total TDP of the part, especially at this, even at 65 watts. So basically, look, you're looking at the same score. Look, Eco 65 is the same as Eco 105, which is basically all within the margin of error for that 7950X. And they're all three of them are slightly better than that Core i9 12th Gen, which you saw anyway on full power. And of course, both the Ryzen 7000 and the Core i9 significant increase in performance over the Ryzen 9 5950X. It's not terrible, but it is definitely the loser here.
Okay. Well, is the multi-threaded score the loser here then?
Yeah, so of course that's the real question you want to know. Well, if I turn on Eco Mode 105, Eco Mode 65, how much performance am I going to take? Well, the good news for AMD is, holy smokes, look at this. So you are seeing the performance of the Ryzen 9 7950X in 65 watt configuration, slightly outperforming the Core i9 12900.
Are you sure you got that right?
Yeah, I got it right. I did actually record that score correctly. Again, I'm a little loopy from all the benchmarking, but it was outperforming the Core i9 12900K. And let me tell you, the reason why I understand I'm right is because when AMD announced this, they said, hey, by the way, I know you're all angry about Ryzen 9 7950X and the 170 watt TDP, but it's still outperforming the 5950. And you can see that here.
Oh, well, definitely outperforming that. Yeah, I just wouldn't have expected the 12900K. Let's go back to the total system power again. Let's look at that. 65 watt is about 170 something. The total system power, we're up there. The 12900K is about 360-ish watts, right?
Yeah.
So at like half the wattage, almost half the wattage.
Almost a third.
It's actually turning in a better score. That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
It is crazy, and it just kind of tells you that, again, AMD has picked up an amazing, a lot of the boost is in the efficiency here. You know, this is a new TSMC process. The I/O die is also smaller. There's just a lot, and then they took the benefits of that die shrink. And I guess they could have said, you know what, we're going to go for really power efficient. We're going to make this thing. We know you care about, you live in Europe, you want to save more power. We know you're a cheapskate like Lena. You don't want to pay that power bill, right? Well, unfortunately, though, the world doesn't work that way. People look at big bars. So, you know what? With the 7950X, you get your big bar, which sells a lot of computers at the store and online because the bar is bigger, and you sort of get your cake too. You get to eat it, you get your cake, and you get to eat it because, again, if you're a small form factor person, you know, look at that Eco 105 mode. Very impressive performance. You're still outperforming a 12900K by a very hefty margin, and your power is down quite a bit too. So I think all the anger, oh my God, that to me is yes. You put this same CPU in a bigger box with a bigger cooler, you will get the best performance. But to me, taking about that 10% hit to get to 105, it's not that bad. You know, again, you take a 25% hit to get to 65%. I mean, you take a 25% performance hit to get to that 65 watt mode, but you're still saving considerably more power. So
Yeah, wow. Okay, so when they first talked about this, number one, I thought, oh man, is that just a cop out that they're using more? And they're like, oh well, we'll give you these other modes. You know, so I was like, well, but the performance is definitely not going to be as good as they're claiming. But I mean, at least in Cinebench it is. And then, yeah, I was also concerned about small form factors. You know, like those, you don't want to generate a ton of heat in there, or at least you want to try to manage thermals as much as you can. But if you're telling me you can still stick, I mean, a 7950X, I wouldn't have thought of just even putting in a small form factor, but if I run it at 65 watts, I could put in a small form factor box and still beat at 12900K. That's wild. That's just wild. That's just wild. Okay. Yeah. Well, that
crazy, right?
Yeah, it blowing my mind a little bit. So okay, let's stop. Let's kind of rewind from here. At the beginning, we said we wanted to compare the power against 12th gen. Short story is, yes, it can use more power. There's sometimes where it doesn't, but generally it does. By how much, it depends on what you do. So maybe you need a little better cooling than the 12900K, but maybe not. Just depends on what you do. But you do have almost this kind of like emergency ripcord. If you really just need to run it in a low power mode, you can at least be rest assured you're probably still going to get great performance even if you run it in an eco mode. Yeah,
and again, looking at that Cinebench single-threaded, maybe the clocks won't bounce around quite as well at the higher wattage ratings, but clearly you're going to get lots of performance even at 64 watts, even for the lighter loads. Again, you know, that is just Cinebench, but I can sort of extrapolate from all the other benchmarking that, yeah, the performance will be quite impressive even at 65 watts. So again, if you got to crank it down because you want, you know, less fan noise, you want to use a little bit of a smaller cooler, put into a smaller box, it's the compromise is not that bad. And also it's kind of neat because traditionally you would have a high-end X part, then maybe you'd get a lower TDP part that is specifically made for low power. This is sort of like getting a multi-purpose chip, which I kind of dig because, you know what, you build in a small form factor today with the 7950X set to 65 watts. Maybe you decide, you know what, screw this small form factor noise. Give me a full case. I've been listening to Gordon. You put it in a big case, you crank it up, you're good to go. All with the same CPU.
Well, I tell you the truth, I'm still having a little bit of a hard time digesting this. This is the first time I'm seeing this information, a lot of it. So I still want to see some more testing. I still want to try it out myself, just, you know, in general use and just kind of do that. So there will be more testing. I want to look at that, but I'm also planning on doing some undervolting as well, kind of see, you know, if that helps at all. But wow, okay, this is crazy. This is crazy. Thank you, Gordon, for showing all this to me, and thank you fine folks for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this, go watch some of the other Ryzen 7000 videos that we have, or whatever other videos. Give us a thumbs up, hit that, smash the bell like the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. Put a little crack in it so you get notified. Thank you. We will see everyone in the next video.